I open the door.
As you push the door open, you see a massive library with tall bookshelves lining the walls.
Is there like a door somewhere?
A door?
Or an exit? I look for an exit.
Why do the players want to leave? They just got here. They're barely in the dungeon. They're immediately on the way out. Why is exploration always like this? Well, it's not just exploration. Let me try another scenario.
36 fire damage.
A bright red flame licks up his body, blackening his skin and incinerating his hair. As the flames eventually die out, Gormoth collapses to the floor, dead.
Or,
It'll take the ship 3 days to go to Waterdeep. What do you do in the meantime?
I practice my sword swinging.
what's going on? Why aren't they playing? Do I have to do everything? Why won't they just look at the bookshelf or loot the body? Maybe do some downtime on the ship? Why are they being so quiet? Because the DM hasn't presented them with a game yet. The players are waiting for the game to show up. But then you might say, they're supposed to be exploring. Okay, exploring what? And how do they know they're supposed to do that? Video games highlight interactables in various ways to show you, the player, that you can do something with them. You can do the same in role-playing games. Welcome to Mystic Arts, where it's business up top and nobody knows I'm wearing shorts down below. My name is Daði, I'm a professional writer and director, and I've been DMing for 10 years. According to the player's handbook, the rhythm of play is as follows. The Dungeon Master describes a scene, the players describe what their characters do, the DM narrates the results of the adventurer's actions. It further details step 1 as, the Dungeon Master tells the players where their adventurers are and what's around them, how many doors lead out of a room, what's on a table, and so on. So if your players don't know what to do next, it's possible you didn't describe the scene in the ideal way. Of course, it's possible your players are inattentive, or on their phones, or racked with paralyzing ADHD. I'm not at your table, I can't say for sure. But I can tell you this, that attention deficit can be subdued by appropriately servicing players with easily digestible chunks of information. I've done it, and I've seen it done, and I think I've figured out what's going on. Let me explain. In Baldur's Gate 3, when you hover your cursor over an interactable, it becomes highlighted in white outlines to tell you that you can click on it. And by extension, that clicking on it does something. You have to find that out for yourself. In most adventure games, when you approach an object you can interact with, there is text in the upper right-hand corner that says, press X to use the telephone, or whatever. You can do that. You can tell your players the RPG equivalent of press X to play the game, only, be a little bit more subtle. But not a lot more subtle. When your players enter that library I mentioned earlier, say, as you push the door open, you see it reveal a massive library with tall bookshelves lining the walls. There is a cracked skylight filtering in gentle rays of dusty sunlight, revealing more of what lies within. You notice a bookshelf just 20 feet away from you with a series of scrolls, and in the center of the room, there's a table with a strange arrangement of candles. Notice, I didn't ask the players what they wanted to do. I told them what options they had by highlighting them in my description. Skylight, scrolls, candles. Then, wait for the players to tell you what they're looking at. Notice I didn't tell them what was interesting about those things. In other words, I didn't spoil the game, I merely highlighted the interactables. Suvi the Druid is interested in the skylight. Maeve the Ranger wants to go look at the candles, and Carlotta the Rogue is gunning for the scrolls. When they tell you what highlighted object they're investigating, give them more information about it, which will, in turn, spark further investigation. This is called a gameplay loop. Information requires interaction, which sparks information, and that sparks interaction, and so on and so forth. Importantly, I make sure to say very little about each thing. You want to invite investigation, not give them the reward first. Keep your description short enough that the players want to ask questions. So, Carlotta the Rogue is looking at the scrolls. She notices they're all written in an infernal script. I don't say any more because she doesn't speak infernal, but Carlotta realizes she can go poke Octavia the Paladin. She speaks Infernal, and maybe they can read the scrolls together. I didn't tell Carlotta that Octavia spoke Infernal. That would be playing the game for her. I just described the obstacle. Octavia's player might then bring up her ability to speak Infernal, or maybe Carlotta assumes as much because she's a tiefling, and now there's a conversation about prejudice happening. Spicy.
Why is it spicy?
When the two of them read the scroll, I, the DM, mention a term they're not familiar with, the Screaming Mass, and, since they're stumped, they ask Suvi the Druid. Suvi wants to make an intelligence check to see if she remembers the term, and on the gameplay loop goes until we're done investigating those scrolls. Each step involves a simple problem, then the players quickly solve the problem, which then involves another problem. This continues until the scene is done. Each problem is just a small hurdle. You see the loop? It's a little game of exploration, and the players can play along. This isn't a puzzle. The problems aren't massive, they aren't stopping play for hours, they're just small games. Though, not in the mechanical sense, not in any sort of number crunchy meaning of the word, just small moments that invite creative thinking. As they explore the library, I cut between the characters. Once Carlotta and Octavia go poke Suvi, I cut to her and introduce new details about the skylight. It's high up, like 50 feet. How are you getting up there? Oh, you can fly, sure, yeah, I forgot about that. You highlight the objects, and then keep your description short. You invite players to ask questions and investigate. Then you respond with a simple but clear answer that ideally provokes a little more investigation. Now you're not just yapping, an actual conversation is happening, and it involves problem solving and discovery. It's a game, it's engaging. The Dungeon Master describes a scene, the players describe what their characters do, and the DM narrates the results of the adventure's actions. With the example of Gormoth earlier when he collapses on the floor, mention how his staff rolls out of his hand and his skull amulet dims as the flames it was wreathed in die out.
I take the amulet, I grab the staff.
Your players will jump on it. On the flip side, if there's nothing interactable, then communicate that. You don't need to literally say it, but you can highlight the emptiness of the room. You enter what appears to be a small 10 by 10 foot chamber. You see some empty coffers and a bed that's been turned over, and that's about it. And if they persist and want to search the room, don't ask for a roll. Just say, you spend a minute turning it over and find nothing of interest. It's done, it's clear. There's nothing here, move on. That also lets you cut straight to the fun, to quote Sly Flourish. Which doesn't have to mean combat, by the way, it can mean the next room with interactables. I would attempt to keep your interactables to a handful each time. If you describe too many objects, they might get lost in the proverbial player sauce. Yummy. 3 seems like a good number, but you could do with 2 or 4. I would avoid having there be only one highlighted object in your scene, unless it's something complex. Basically, if there's only one way forward, you haven't presented a game, you've presented a railroad. And the cruel part of it is that if you pause after one highlighted object, you've sort of made it so that the only way forward is to click X. It's kind of like a role-playing game version of a walking simulator.
As you crest the hill, you see ahead of you the small town of Pine Creek, nestled in the hills.
I don't know, we keep walking.
Okay, you get there.
If the players are headed to Pine Creek, why stop the description just outside of it? That's not great. Why did the DM stop talking? In that instance, he could have just described the town and then continued talking, saying they get closer and see the town gates, describe the townsfolk. Just get into it. If there was any question about how to approach the town, then maybe pausing for player input might have worked. Say then that there is one interactable object in a room, and it's something very complex and bizarre. Something that's a puzzle, all by itself. You're fine to focus on that. You've presented the game. It's one object, and you invite the players to look into it very closely. You open the doors to reveal a massive clockwork device that appears to be 30 feet tall and 15 feet wide. Your players will probably leap at the opportunity to ask clarifying questions. Are there levers? Is it ticking? Is it connected to something? That means you've already presented the game to them, discovered the nature of the machine. They'll play with it for a while. If you want to present more than 3 or 4 options to your players, consider nesting them inside each other so that your opening descriptions remain short and invites investigation, and then the investigation yields more highlighted objects. Let's use that library example from earlier. Maybe you think the table with the candles has a bunch of other interesting things on it. Let the players find that out. When Maeve the Ranger comes to the table, describe how there are 2 sets of drawers. When she wants to open a drawer, ask which one, right or left. She opens up a drawer and it has a magic wand, a pouch, and a stack of papers. 3 highlighted objects. Then, when she grabs the papers, you'll say there are some files on storing books, but also some personal letters. Again, which one does she click? This way, exploration becomes a game. I've started games like this with a crime scene where the characters were investigating. First, I described the 5 rooms of the house. Then, each room had a few interactable objects. Each interactable object had nested objects within. Players had a blast with the whole session just looking at the crime scene, uncovering every bit of secret they could get their hands on. When presenting these sorts of options and branches, make them distinct from one another. If the choices are too arbitrary, the players won't bite. Say, for example, the PCs enter a dungeon after defeating the Guardian at the entrance. They're presented with 3 branches forward. They'll want to know something before choosing which branch to go down. So you give each branch a little description. They hear noises down the first branch, like movement from a creature of some kind. Branch 2 has a distinct smell of rot, and the players can see bones littering the ground. And finally, branch 3 seems dead quiet and dark, as if it's empty. Where do they want to go? This way, avoid being arbitrary. And more importantly, the players have a debate on their hands. Where do they want to go? They might try and discern what kind of creature was moving around, or they might identify the bones, but all of that is in service to the game you present it. Which path do you want to explore? The same can be applied to downtime, like when the players are sitting on a ship for 3 days, as I mentioned earlier in the intro. The reason they don't immediately have an answer for downtime activities is because the players don't know what the game is. They don't know what they can do with their downtime. They don't know what their options are. Whatever kind of downtime's options you present is up to you. I'll make a video about it one day, but for now I'll remind you of the principles from earlier. For it to be a game, there have to be multiple options, and the players have to pick. The options can't be arbitrary. The players should be making somewhat informed decisions. They can be nested. Finishing one downtime activity could springboard into a load of other interesting options. How you tie these things together is the game you're presenting. You know you're presenting a good game when figuring out the optimal option requires analyzing the odds of various outcomes. In other words, when the players start valuing risk versus reward. Of course, combat, D&D's favorite child, doesn't have any of these problems, because combat has rounds, turns, and it has an obvious objective built in. Fight the bad guys. Though of course, fights can have additional objectives layered on top. In combat, the players know what's interactable. They know their options. They know what they're trying to do. In exploration, you need to make the game obvious to your players. Tell them what they can do by highlighting objects. There is nothing wrong with signaling to your players like this which parts of the world are a game to be played. In fact, that silence that happens when you don't is a clear sign they're waiting to be told what they can do. I typically don't tell my players what they can and can't do. I just highlight the objects and let them pick. In screenwriting, every scene is supposed to have a purpose. It's about something. In RPGs, your encounters should have games in them. And if they don't have a game built in, you're talking about a scene. And then you don't need a game. You just need to render it. Loads of people like to take the word role-playing game and divide it into 2 separate things, roleplay and game. But I'm here to tell you that there is a reason we call our hobby role-playing games, because it's both at the same time. The first time I played with another professional writer, he was also a huge optimizer. One doesn't stop the other. He loves making complex character builds and exploits because he feels they inspire his stories. My whole table is players who love to roleplay and love to optimize their characters. The dichotomy there is false. Invented by the internet to make memes. Some really funny memes. RPGs aren't about role-playing and then stopping the roleplay once you roll initiative. It's both, all the time. There's loads of advice out there about making sure to keep role-playing after you've rolled initiative. I'm here to tell you to make sure to keep playing a game even though you're done with combat. Listen, loads of other RPGs call their dungeon master the game master, and I think it's probably a better term for it. Since, as the GM, you're a game designer. You're always designing games, on the spot, live in front of your players. When the PCs enter a consequential dialogue scene, you have to determine the difficulty, the consequences, the rewards. That's a game. When the PCs are about to encounter a trap, you have to determine the chances of it springing, the odds of the PC spotting it, and what exactly happens if they don't. That's a game. When the PCs find a load of gold, you need to make sure there is something the PCs want to spend it on. Not just one option, but loads that compete for their gold. That's a game. When the PCs have 3 days to kill on a ship, they need to know what they can do with their downtime. Things compete for their time and they have to pick which option to pursue. That's a game. It's a role-playing game. Both. Not one at a time. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. Thanks so much for watching this video. Me and my girlfriend make these videos together, both of us writing and editing, and it's been so much fun reading your guys' comments and just watching the channel take off. It's unbelievable. So we wanted to ask that if you found this video useful, let us know in the comments or by hitting the like button, and if you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing and hitting the bell to be notified when we release new videos. Until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.
Dorks.
So rude.